Hey guys, welcome to the video of my build. In this video, I'm going into the details of the three parts that make up my rover: the top deck, the bottom deck, and the cover, right? So before you watch this video, I would strongly recommend watching the overview video where I show the general functionality of the rover. There's also an implementation series where I go into the code, but that's not really a prerequisite for this video. So I would just watch the overview video before coming to this one. Now, in this picture, you can see that there's a cover with a Livox Mid 360 attached to the top of the cover. And then underneath the cover, there's the top deck, which has the main compute, the Jetson and the Pi, all connected via Ethernet. And then below that is the bottom deck, which has the motor drivers and the motors attached to the bottom deck and the wheels attached to the motors. I'm going to go into details on all the different components that are there on both the decks. So let's get into that. All right, so as you can see, I've dismantled my rover. On the left here, I have my top deck. In the middle, I have my bottom deck. And on the right, I have my cover with the Livox Mid 360 on top. Let's start with the bottom deck. So on the bottom deck, let's start with the batteries. I have a 2S LiPo battery over here. This is an 8,000 milliamp hour battery. I have a 3S LiPo battery over here, a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. So let's start with the power distribution from this 3S LiPo. You can see it's connected to this PDB board via the XT60 connector. Right, so this PDB board, what is it powering? Let's go through that. So first of all, it's powering these motor drivers. So you see these two blue chips, right? So those are the motor drivers. Each motor driver powers two DC motors, and they're 12-volt DC motors, and you can, let me lift up the bottom deck a bit so you can see them. So they're right here, these two motors, right? And there are two others on the other side, right? So each motor driver powers two of those. And both motor drivers are connected to the microcontroller, the ESP32 that you see over here in the middle, via these orange, blue, gray wires, right? So those are the connections, and if you see my baseline implementation video, I talk about the firmware, which is flashed exactly on this ESP32 to control these motor drivers, right? So that happens because they're connected over here, right? Now, the PDB board also powers this particular capacitor, right? And it also powers this capacitor, right? So what are these capacitors doing? What are they hooked up to? So one of these capacitors is hooked up to this Ethernet switch, right? And this Ethernet switch is how the LiDAR, so the Livox Mid 360, the Jetson over here, and the Pi communicate. So one of them is powering that Ethernet switch. And the other one is powering this buck converter down here. So I'm not sure if you can see it under the wires, but it's right here. And this buck converter essentially powers this particular router, which provides the local network for the rover. So that's what's happening here with the 3S LiPo battery, right? Now let's move to the 2S LiPo battery. So the 2S LiPo battery is connected over here via this XT90 connector, and this XT90, and then this connection goes to this power rail, right? And this power rail has these wires coming off it. So you'll see loose wires from this power rail, right? So where do these wires, they have ferrules at the end, where do these wires connect to? These wires essentially connect up to the Pi right here through the screw terminal. And the ESP32 has this USB connection right here, which connects to the Pi, and that's how the ESP32 receives power, right? So there's one more thing that we need to kind of go over on the bottom deck. That is these wires over here, right? So you can see these wires that come in from the bottom. So where are these wires coming from? So let me lift up the bottom deck again. You can see these wheels down here, right, over here. And you see this connection, this wire connected to the wheel. And there's one more on the other side. So these are the Go Builda pods, right? The Go Builda pods that connect into the Go Builda Pinpoint V2 computer. So the Pinpoint V2 is right here. You see this X and Y, and that's where these wires connect to, right? They connect into the X and Y. And in my baseline implementation, when I say rover odometry, you'll see me say rover odometry in my baseline implementation video. I'm actually talking about odometry from this Go Builda Pinpoint computer right here, right?
So that's all for the bottom deck. Now let's move on to the top deck.
Alright, so I hope that video was useful explaining the components of the bottom deck. Before moving on to the top deck, I want to give you guys a clearly labeled diagram of the main components on the bottom deck, right? So I would like you guys to probably pause the video here for a bit just to ensure that you understand kind of the main components that were used in the bottom deck that are labeled on this image over here.
All right, let's go through the top deck right here. On the top deck, my main power source is this 4S 8500 milliamp battery, which is connected via the XT60 connector to this PDB board. What does the PDB board power? Let's go through that. So the PDB port powers this wire right here, which is the connection to the LiDAR. So it powers the LiveOx Mid 360, which if you remember is on my cover right here on top, right? It also powers via this wire back there, my WaveShare USB expansion board. Now I don't really need this expansion board, but I wanted to have it there in case I want to add peripherals. Right now it's just connected to my fan. So it's providing power to my fan, which cools this top deck. And then finally, it powers my Jetson Orin NX right here, okay? So that's what this board is powering. Now let's talk about some other components on the top deck. We have my Ethernet switch, and my router, right? So if you remember from when I was talking about my bottom deck, I said the bottom deck has wires, those capacitors, which power both the Ethernet switch and the router. So one of the capacitors they have like ferrules at the end. They connect into the screw terminal right here to power the Ethernet switch. So my router, my Jetson, my Pi, and my LiDAR are all connected to this switch. So that's how they communicate with each other. Now, the other capacitor is powering this particular buck converter. I'd mentioned that. So this buck converter has this USB-C to this white cable. You can see it's a USB-C to C cable, which essentially powers my router. Right, and then finally I have this Go Build a Pinpoint V2 computer for my baseline odometry over here, right? And I spoke about how I have like wires coming out from those pods underneath my bottom deck that connect into that Pinpoint V2 computer, right? So that is the top deck in a nutshell. There's one piece that I'll kind of talk about before closing out this discussion of the top deck, is the camera right here. So I have this OAK-D S2 camera over here on this rig, right? Currently the camera is not connected because it hasn't been used in my development yet. But I've just added this camera in case, beyond, so right now I've just been working with the LiDAR, but if I want to integrate any components of vision or anything like that with my camera, I've added that in as well with some cables over here, right? So there you go. So that is the top deck, bottom deck, and the cover. There's not much to talk about. There's just a cover with the LiveOx Mid 360 on top, which gets power from this particular PDB board, right?
All right, so here's a clearly labeled diagram of the main components of the top deck. So you guys can pause over here to take a look at these components before moving on. All right, so that pretty much wraps up the build of the rover. You've seen the components on the bottom deck and the top deck. The only remaining component of the rover is the cover, which simply has a LiveOx Mid 360 on top. So there's not much to go over there. I hope you guys enjoyed the video of the build, and I encourage you guys, if you're interested in how it works, to definitely go over the implementation series as well. Thanks.